of everything.
Podcast then.
Bear with me. So when you take everything about democracy, the voting, the representation, and you whittle that down to its most basic part, the most basic part, what is democracy? Democracy is nothing more than a mechanism of conflict resolution. That's all it is.
Right, democracy. That word, ladies and gentlemen, that is fact. Trump came to UK. He is the president of the United States. Whether you like it or not.
So,
I didn't like Blair, but I accept him. You have to accept
what is
who
democracy?
is in charge.
Democracy is
may not
nothing
like
more
him,
than a
you may not
mechanism
vote
of
for
conflict
him,
resolution.
that is democracy.
So when you take a particular decision,
That is democracy.
we're going to impose restrictions
You
on the
can't
kinds of
change
food. We're going to
If you
build a
change
dam
it,
in this area to
you're going
divert
down
the
the wrong
flow of
road.
water. You bring in a bunch of people and you canvass the question upon them, and they basically, 6 of us say yes, we should build the dam over here, and 4 of us don't. You know what? That's the arbitrary drawing point. Let's build the dam over here, because 6 people said yes to it and no people didn't. Now those people who agreed or disagreed have a kind of social contract which binds them to the decision of the group. But, and here's the big but, the question has to be posed. Yeah, great big but. Yeah. Yeah, so here's the big but. First of all, the question was posed to a small number of people who had an understanding of what it is that they were trying to do. When you go to Greek Athenian politics, it wasn't just everybody and his slave that got to make a vote. It was a specific group of people who actually bore very painful consequences on failure. A lot of these rulers would be killed if they picked the wrong decision.
But you're talking about the past.
I'm talking about the
origins
origins
of democracy. You talk about the
I'm
past.
talking about
The origins of democracy.
sir, of democracy.
Bro, the origins of
If everyone else is
democracy.
following along, let's just use the
How a question is posed, to who the question is posed, in what form the question is posed becomes very important, as it can make or break. It's not as simple anymore as you would say in the past. It's not as simple as building a dam. Or I was answering you, sir.
Well, you said about prosperity,
Athenians.
the money.
No, I didn't
right?
say anything about prosperity.
Before you did?
No, Chris was
No, you did. No, you did.
So would you
No,
go
no,
back?
no,
to,
no,
hold
no,
on,
he did.
Would you
No,
go?
you
Hold
did.
on, mate. Hold on. Would you go back to a time pre-televised politicians? So if you look at the way that the way it works at the moment is there is a vocal minority, which is the big business and lobbyists, who push a lot of power onto politicians because they're the only ones who actually have time to watch and focus on what politicians vote for. So they give them a lot of money in their campaigns, they speak up. But then us as voters, because it might only, so for example the sugar tax, okay, is a good example, where it only costs us like an extra 10p a bag of sugar. But the sugar companies make a shit ton of money off that, or they're able to tariff other countries. That's what happens in the States when they grow sugar. So they put it through in law, but because it costs us so little, we then don't go and vote against it, even though we do take a negative to the cost. So they push it through, even though it's a detriment to us, because it helps them. And that is what happens, because we don't pay attention to what they're actually voting on. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah. So no disagreement on what you're saying, and that falls back to the point of like, do our votes actually have a say in the process? Reality of the situation, they don't. And on top of that, there have been a number of very interesting studies conducted in the past 8 years. They've actually been published, so you can buy them publicly, like on Amazon or whatever. One of the studies was called "Ruling the Void," and that brings up to the formal ruling class of people. So you've got people who sit in Parliament, Corbyn, Cameron, etc., etc. Those guys, and say what you will about their intentions. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know them personally, but you can tell that there is a very clear separation between a career politician who's making decisions based on a very different set of criteria than, say, you or I, versus what you or I would choose. Now, let's be clear. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I am saying that the incentive structure is completely separated.
What is your criteria?
For what?
For a good democracy.
For that way or that way?
So
You say your criteria.
No, I said your plural.
No, you said.
Did I say mine?
Yes.
Did I say mine? When did I?
What kind of what's a good criteria
What
for
would you
good
like?
governance?
What would you
I'll
like?
be honest with you, I genuinely don't know. In my
don't know.
personal,
You're open to dictatorship or something else.
What would you like?
No, I would say that the most realistic, best government would be a benevolent dictatorship.
Really?
But that is an oxymoron. That is completely abstract and fictional.
Actually, it's
it
not.
can't exist.
Singapore is a good example.
So the
There
one
are exceptions.
example, the one example that I'm growing increasingly skeptical.
What about deliberative?
A what?
Deliberative.
Yeah.
What's a deliberative
Can I
model?
come and speak?
So yeah, those are my points. Thank you for your time, gentlemen.
I want to be completely. My name's Kyle. I speak every week here, more or less. I want to be completely unambiguous. I am in favor of a deliberative democracy and completely against a dictatorship, benevolent or otherwise. I think we should have a direct, face-to-face democratic system in England. Not a monarchy, not a republic, not a representative democracy. Direct, face-to-face democracy. That for me makes most sense. And what does this man mean by deliberation? What this man means is that there's more to democracy than just voting. There's far more to democracy than just having a vote on an issue. So 6 people choose one thing, 4 people are against it, so we go with what the 6 people want. It's far more than that. Deliberation is careful debate and discussion. That's what we really need. And I believe the sooner we have this, the sooner Britain will have a healthy relationship to the rest of the world. Britain is a much more active state than many people realize here. It has a far bigger role in military affairs, in international conflict than people really realize. In fact, it's stoking the flames of numerous conflicts right now. Syria is the most interesting one, I think. But there are lots of other examples as well. The main thing I speak about at Speaker's Corner is very simple. Britain is not democratic, but the sooner it becomes democratic, the sooner it will be better for British people and the rest of the world. Because then British people actually directly control how they make the decisions about how Britain relates to the rest of the world. I mean, look, for example, I've been speaking about Julian Assange, for one thing. I mean, you hear in the newspapers, I heard Martin Wolf say in the Financial Times recently, when Donald Trump came to visit our country, he said, Theresa May needs to make a firm stance, take a firm stance on international law. She should say to Donald Trump, you've got to respect the multilateral institutions like the United Nations and so on. And really, to say that Britain is somehow standing up for what he calls a rules-based international order, I think Martin Wolf needs to get his head checked, seriously, to have a look at the history of what Britain's really been like with relation to the rules-based international order. Take, for example, Julian Assange. William Hague threatened, when Julian Assange was in the Ecuadorian embassy, William Hague threatened to send in the Metropolitan Police to forcefully extract Julian Assange out of the embassy. That would have violated the Vienna Convention on the sanctity of embassies as a space which cannot be violated by state's power. That's one example. I'll give the example of Syria. When the United States, Britain and France illegally invaded Syria, they were violating the UN's charter. You can only invade and attack a country if you have the permission of the Security Council or you're being under attack yourself. And we weren't under attack when the accusation was made that Assad was using chemical weapons on his own people, something which now has been disproved. Assad never used chemical weapons in Douma. There's no evidence that he did that. Theodore Postel of Massachusetts Institute of Technology is a ballistics expert. He's come out, he went to the site where this supposed attack happened. And he found out absolutely no evidence that there was a chemical attack by the government. Now, this kind of terrible foreign policies, it's got to have a lasting impact of millions of people's lives. I mean, let's take Iraq, another example of an illegal invasion. Led to more than 2 million refugees, as far as I know, and 1 million dead. People like Tony Blair have blood on their hands, they really do. I know it's a cliche to say he's a war criminal by now, everyone says this now. But really, it's something to think about, meditate on. He's got the lives of millions of people, you know. Another example I've spoken about in Speaker's Corner is Rwanda. Just 2 years before I was born, there was a massive genocide in Rwanda, which everyone's familiar with. I think almost 1 million people died in the conflict between the Hutus and the Tutsis. The United Kingdom stood by and did nothing. The United Kingdom was obligated, under international law, to act to stop genocide. It signed a convention in the 1950s, the Genocide Convention, which legally obliges powerful countries like the UK, France and the US to act and stop genocide. Remember, the Rwandan conflict was mostly fought out by machetes and clubs. It could have very easily been stopped by a superior armed
stopped by
nation
Rambo.
like the UK.
I was actually there.
Involvement on France.
You were
I
there.
swear to God, Rambo could have sorted that out.
Rambo could have
They were
sorted
like
that out.
Dad's army.
That's a bit of an exaggeration, but I see his point.
No,
I
but the
actually
UN
got
went in
arrested
and they
by
did
a
fuck
couple
all.
of Dad's
The UN went
army
in, they surrounded like the famous hotel, but they went in, they provided support and food, but they didn't want
The
shoot or
UN
stop
couldn't do
any-
anything.
But they couldn't.
The UN tried to do things, but repeatedly, the UK, the US, if you've watched Hotel Rwanda, which I think is a very, it downplays a lot of things it shouldn't downplay, there's a line where a UN official says to the main character, who's it played by Don Cheadle? He says to him, the hotel owner, he says, none of the powers want to help you. I'm sorry, you're going to have to sort this out yourself, because none of the powers want to help you. People like Douglas Hurd, they really have blood on their hands. Douglas Hurd was the head of the Foreign Office in England at the time. And he said, according to a member of his cabinet, or a member of the Foreign Office, he slammed his hand down on the table and he said in a meeting, "We will not call this a genocide. We will not call this a genocide." Because he knew that if the United Kingdom came out and labelled what was going on in Rwanda as a genocide, then the UK would be legally obliged to act, which it didn't want to do for various complicated reasons to do with France and Britain's imperialism from the years before, which I'm not going to go into now. The fact is, Britain didn't do anything when it could have done something. Very powerful, wealthy country. So I'll take questions just in 1 minute, literally 1 minute. We didn't act, we acted aggressively in Syria when we had no right to. We didn't act in Rwanda when we should have acted in Rwanda. We illegally invaded Iraq, which is the supreme international crime for which Nazis were hanged after World War II. All of this violation of international law happens because the UK doesn't have a democracy. Because if the British public really controlled how we related to the places like the Middle East and so on, then I don't think we would allow it. British people are not that way inclined. They're not warmongering people. It takes a lot of propaganda to whip the English up into hysteria to support this kind of policy. They would never support it. So that's all I wanted to say. I'm happy to take questions.
So in the case of Rwanda,
And then I'll say yours.
So in the case of Rwanda, would going in have made us weaker in another area that would have been detrimental to us?
Of course not.
But you said the reason it was because
this
of
gentleman
France.
said Rambo could have stopped the Rwandan genocide.
would have been
I think
quite
that's a terrible over-exaggeration, but I see his point. Really, do you know what the United Nations was asking for with Rwanda? They asked for a few armored personnel carriers and some people with guns. That's all they asked for. And the United Kingdom didn't even want to provide that. John Major said, this was the Prime Minister at the time, he said, he made a big deal about in the House of Parliament how we're helping them. Do you know what Britain actually did? Britain sent 50 Bedford trucks to the Rwandan conflict. These are trucks from the early Cold War, and they fell, according to Romeo Dallaire, who was the Canadian who led the UN peacekeeping force. These trucks fell apart one after the other. That's what Britain did to stop the conflict. So I'll take your question and then yours and then yours.
Hang on a second. It's a little bit of a weak corollary because, first of all, you can't act unilaterally. So you have to define.
Maybe you do under international law.
Second of all, well, hang on a minute, yeah. The UN as an edifice in intervention has been an unmitigated disaster since its inception. The only case study where the UN and EU even were not involved, where you had a relative success, was in Kosovo because it was a NATO-sponsored Russian-American initiative. No EU, no UN. 6 months duration, 20th amount of the. Well, these are the statistics. This isn't a polemic. These are
The Americans.
Can you just at least admit, before I go on to take any other questions, this is a very contentious thing you just said there. There are many people who criticize NATO's involvement there. Many people. I for one think it was a terrible idea.
They did it in the Second World War. You seem to forget. The Americans and Soviet/Russians have always worked great in alliances. And they did it in Kosovo. No EU and no UN.
But the Americans started that.
It was a bilateral.
I'm just putting it out there. During the Kosovo conflict, it wasn't just bombs flying from NATO. Britain was actually actively funding groups like the Kosovo Liberation Army, very violent, basically terrorists. We call them terrorists if they weren't our friends. Because they're our friends, we call them a liberation army. That's how semantics works for the British elite. It's a bit of, what I'm trying to do here, ladies and gentlemen, it's a bit presumptuous. I'm only 23 years old. I haven't finished my university degree at all. I dropped out. I completely gave up on it. I'm not an educated person. But what I hope can happen through dialogue like this is learning about intellectual self-defense. Really, that's what it's about. Aristotle said this thousands of years ago. Someone was mentioning the Greeks. Aristotle said, the men of Athens, they learn how to physically defend themselves through physical strength. And they're very strong, physically strong men. But why don't they learn about mental self-defense? And that's much more important, because we haven't got that in common with animals. We can mentally learn to self-defense. So when this man says that Kosovo was a great success, have a look at what happened. We backed the Kosovo Liberation Army, and they had committed numerous mass atrocities against civilians in their effort to create a new state. It was a breakaway state in Albania. Well, they wanted to be Albania. It's complicated. I don't want to go into that because it's another big conflict. You want to ask a question?
Yeah, at the crux of the Rwandan genocide was the fact that UN peacekeepers can never shoot unless they are fired upon. So they had no remit to act in Rwanda. If you were in charge, would you change international law?
In charge of where?
Pardon?
If I was in charge of
Say
where?
you're General Secretary of the UN, and you can change the rules around how UN peacekeepers can engage. Would you allow UN peacekeepers
Do you know the UN,
to fire first?
So the UN Secretary General at the time, it was Boutros Ghali, I think his name is. Yeah. He was. I think he did everything he could have done. Remember, the United Nations has no executive power. It can't actually enforce any of its rules. It requires the voluntary consent of its constituent parts to bring it about. Boutros Ghali repeatedly asked, people in power in America and Britain. He asked John Major face to face, please do something. So please help us, help our peacekeeping force. Remember, you may not need to fire on any of these genocidaires, these death squads. But just having a personnel carrier arrive with men armed with guns, that's enough to cause them to stop. That's enough to cause them to stop. What the reality was, because Britain barely did anything, you've got horrendous scenes that played out in Rwanda, really disgusting. I mean, not to get too lurid, but Romeo Dallaire described himself. He said he was up to his knees in bodies. The only sounds he could hear were the sounds of dogs eating the dead bodies and birds flying overhead. Silence, not the sound of a child, not the sound of a single soul in these villages that had been massacred. Really, I mean, it was gruesome. Britain could have done something, and we didn't.
If you're saying that all... Sorry, you had a question first.
Yeah, so I mean, you're talking about, this is basically two parts, so I'll ask the second question after you answer the first part.
By the way, you're from America. You are just as bad, if not worse.
Okay, fine.
Sorry to say. If there are any Chinese people here as well, it's the same for your government.
So when you say a face-to-face democracy, like how exactly does that work?
Okay, face-to-face democracy. You're from the States, and actually there's a much stronger tradition of face-to-face democracy there than there is here. In the towns of New England, which were set up by Puritans from places like East Anglia and Kent and so on, after the English Revolution failed, a lot of them left and they went to America to start a new life in a sort of, what they called America was a city on a hill. That's how they described it, right? And America's got powerful appeal to many people, even today, as a new world, a fresh start. You know, it still has that powerful appeal. They arrived in these towns, in places like Massachusetts and so on, and they had face-to-face democracy, direct democracy. In their congregations at church, which were basically all the people in the town, because all the people in the town were Puritans, they would make their face-to-face decisions on things like taxes, who was allowed in the town and out of the town, or not out of the town, you could leave whenever you wanted. But if you wanted to set up a house there, you had to get their permission. They decided things like how to organize the local militia. These men, and a few women as well in some of the assemblies, they in many ways pushed the American Revolution forward.
Okay. And
They're a big part of what makes America a great country. I mean, these are the...
how realistic do you think?
In a village hall and discuss.
Yeah.
Should we?
I want to ask the second part.
It could be at the level of a village. It could be at the level of a town.
How realistic
the level of
do
an
you think
urban
it is
neighborhood.
in a 65 million person country?
I think that every single one of you is capable of making decisions like this with your fellow neighbor.
America's not face-to-face. How realistic is this in a
It never was tried. It was never tried in Libya. I know what you're talking about, but it's different.
No, but even in America, at a state level...
Hold on a second. What were you? Sorry, you were going to
How
say something else.
realistic is what you're describing in a country of like the United Kingdom of 65 million people? Because you can't all go to a town hall with
Of course not.
65
No,
million
of course
people.
not. No,
So
65
how does
million
it
people.
work in real, like,
No, I'm not saying that all of London should get together in one place in London and make decisions on a huge... I mean, that's ridiculous.
how do you make decisions on international policy in a face-to-face democracy?
So what there would be is, this is, by the way, if you're interested in this philosophy, I can only give a very small introduction. I can't lecture you for an hour on this. The philosophy is called Communalism. And the best espouser of this philosophy is an American called Murray Bookchin, if you want to find out more. Now, communalism, according to... I'm answering this question, just give me a second. I'll tell you your question in a second. Communalism says that policy making should belong to the public, and that administration should belong to agents that are elected, recallable, and specifically mandated. And they have only administrative power, so they only have the power to carry out the will of the people. These administrative councils who work at the local, regional, national level. And they would simply have the power to carry out the will of their assemblies. And they're not representatives, they're merely delegates. That's real democracy, in my opinion. What we have in England is a constitutional monarchy, which basically operates as a republic. And a republic is where you elect the people who have a say. But you have no control over policy yourself. You just get to say who has... And that's a step in the right direction, for sure. I mean, I'd hate to live in a place like, I don't know, in Egypt or somewhere like that, where you have no say in anything. But it could be better. If you look at British history, it's very much the story of ordinary British people, of which I consider myself one, struggling piece by piece to expand their power and take away power from the elites. I mean, for example, the English Revolution was Parliament trying to take power away from Charles, who's an absolute monarch, and put it in the hands of a representative body. And then the history for 150 years after that, or more, 200 years, was about widening the base of those people who could vote for that Parliament. Eventually it included women. And now in Scotland it includes 16-year-olds, right? It's expanding more and more. Now I say we need to take power away from Parliament and put it into local assemblies. That makes most sense to me.
Okay, so on your point of a face-to-face direct democracy, okay, do you work?
Sort of.
Who here works? By show of hands, who works?
Well, you're all unemployed.
Okay.
Wow, I have so many unemployed people here.
Who works in retail or in shift-based work? Who works in shift-based
I think
work?
you're the only one.
No, I work in sales. I work a set of hours, Monday to Friday. Okay. So when are you going to hold? So let's say I want to vote. I was like, when do you hold that? Because if I work, I can't go at that time to take part. Well, that prick who's unemployed and therefore just wants better taxes to pay his things, he can go and make his say. So then his vote counts more than me. But he's not partaking in citizenship. So all of a sudden now you've got a problem.
Yeah.
That's why we have representative democracy. But then if you work in retail, you can't go on a Saturday afternoon. But then if you work in retail, you've got to work on fucking Boxing Day.
You know,
you're a single mum working in retail.
This man is completely right to point this out. The Athenians, at least the citizens who had the power, who are all men, who are all slave owners, who are all, no, it's important. In Athens it was important. You couldn't vote if you were a woman. These men had a lot of time on their hands because they had slaves doing all the work and they had women doing all the work at their house. So they didn't have to do any work. They could spend all day making policies and being involved in citizenship. Today we don't need to use slaves anymore. Although capitalism does use slaves in sweat shops and all around the world, we don't have to use slaves. We can use automation. Most jobs that are done today, I think, are bullshit jobs. They don't need to be done. Excuse my French, but it's true. I think they're really unnecessary, wasteful. I mean, really, if you're going to start a social movement for justice and change, it should be to recognize that there is a lot of work we do which is not paid, which is valuable, and then the work we are paid for is a waste of time. We're sitting in meetings, we're doing nothing. No offense, you're doing sales. It's not adding anything to social life. No offense, I used to do a job in sales myself. I was selling real estate. It was contributing absolutely nothing to society at all.
Have you ever bought something from an email? Have you ever bought something from an email?
No.
Okay.
Never.
So how is sales bullshit? I meet you when I tell you what I do.
There are people that are so intelligent in this country, people like yourself, people who are so smart, have so much resources and so much rational potential, and yet they are working out ways to make you click on an email to make you buy something. That's what they're wasting their time doing. We could have. There's so much work. There's so much work that needs to be done in England. Work on.
Pull the other one.
That's the third time you've said that now. I'm starting to think you actually want me to physically pull your leg. There's a lot of work that needs to be done which isn't being done because it's not paid to do. And that's the mentality that's prevalent in England. It's only work if you're paid to do it. I think there's a lot of work that's valuable that should be paid. Well, it shouldn't be paid, but it should be recognised. At the very least, it should be recognised as work. Especially, I don't want to sound like I'm not trying to be flattering. A lot of women do work which is not recognised. Caring work and child rearing and stuff. It's not paid, so it's not seen as work, but it is. The government calls it care. They don't call it care work, which is what it is.
But caring
it's
for
only
a
care
child
work
is a
if it's paid, and you have a care worker paid to do it. So this is a step in the right direction. If we start to realise that there's a lot of work that's valuable, that shouldn't be paid, but should be recognised, then we can start to automate all the crap jobs that don't need to be done, or that shouldn't be done by humans. Just automate them. Yeah, tax law could be automated very easily. In fact, do you know what the thing is right now? It's being automated anyways.
Yeah.
Tax law is being
What I meant was
eliminated
simplify
as a
it,
job.
so you don't have, because your point was you've got highly intelligent people doing jobs that they shouldn't do.
So tax lawyers circumventing a complicated tax code is a bullshit job. You should have, maybe 2 taxes, one for corporations, one for individuals, and then those guys might go and create something, start a business, or sell something. I agree with you that sales is bullshit. I work with sales
basic
too.
income.
Yeah.
Basic income would allow people the time and the space to really find out what it is that's good for them. It's a good profession. They can be more enterprising. If there are people here today that value business. You spoke in your speech, Sean, right? Yeah. You said in your speech, Sean, about how important it was for Britain to be a prosperous country. Brexiteers and Remainers both believe this. Yep. But whether or not we leave the European Union, a lot of people can't add to prosperity because they don't have the time. They're stuck in jobs which they hate, which is sucking their life away. That's the problem. I think if everyone had a basic income, a basic amount of money, and I think John McDonnell, to his credit, has now spoken about testing one out in Sheffield, and I think Sheffield needs it especially. They should test it out and see what happens. If it works there, then it could work everywhere, I think.
I can't wait to see their rent prices go up. If you bring this income.
It's been proven that rent prices don't go up. When a basic income was tested out in Canada and in India, a third world and a first world country, rent prices did not go up.
Except when they tested it in Canada, it was on a very, very small scale. And most of those places, they owned their houses already. Because it was on a very small scale. One of the studies that was done, it was only done on one family in an area.
In Finland, it was bigger. I think.
No, but they owned. But most of them who you with owned the houses that they fucking worked in.
Finland, and they haven't tried. What happened in Finland?
They tried it in Finland. I hear this a lot. It wasn't really tried in Finland. It was only given to people who were in a job. That's not what a basic income really is. A basic income is a fixed monthly payment given to everybody in a society, regardless of whether they're working or not. It's designed to replace benefits.
No, but why did it fail? Answer this question.
Because it should have
Finland,
still
it
worked.
wasn't a basic income.
No, but
in Finland, it wasn't given to people who were not
Yeah,
working.
but it
As
should
far as I know.
still worked. It should have still worked. But why didn't it?
It was still basically it was just ordinary benefits, and ordinary benefits have a problem because a lot of the time people get into benefits and they get what's called a poverty trap. They don't want to get out of benefits because it's so difficult getting onto benefits in the first place. They don't want to risk taking a job and then having to go through the whole process of getting back on benefits again.
It's not hard to get on benefits. It's
not
hard at all.
It's actually it's a rational thing to do to stay on benefits and not to get a job. It makes sense from an economic point of view. It's so difficult to get on them. That's why economists call it a poverty trap.
Bullshit. It's hard to. No, I tell you why it's bullshit. I ran a business for 2 years. Okay, I then shifted that business into doing something else, and that something else failed. So I didn't like doing this, but I had to go on benefits. It took me 2 weeks to apply, get a meeting, get something. And what it is, I went there and I explained my position. I'm not currently earning, but I plan to be earning by here. And I'm going to get a job by there. This is what I'm looking for, and I found a job in about a month from doing that. But I was allowed to go on benefits really easily. All I had to do was show what I was looking for. If I couldn't find a job in a certain period of time, they would start allocating me work. Going on benefits is not hard.
You find it easy. I don't think it's easy for everybody.
Because they can't read.
Often it's
easy.
Often it's a humiliating process.
Yeah,
I've never had to go on benefits myself, but I've just known from speaking to people it can be a humiliating process. Really, not only to get the benefits in the first place, but to stay on them. You often have to do all kinds of condescending things, like you have to keep a diary of all the amount of hours you spent trying to find a job. All kinds of patronizing, childish things to do to someone stuck on benefits. I think it's insulting. I think the whole thing needs to be overhauled. In fact, I don't think we should have a benefit system. We should have a basic income. Maybe we need benefits for disabled people. Maybe just that group of people, disabled people. I think everyone else.
You can't ignore. I agree 100% with you, a basic income. I can understand all the arguments for the benefits. It won't cause rent increase, it will not cause entrepreneurialism, it will not cause inflation. I understand all that. But why didn't it work in Finland? Because of universal income. No, everybody would get a basic income, whether they had a job or not. So
they only offered it. I already said this, but I'll say it again in a different way. Let me explain. That's a loaded question because it is. Can I answer your question?
Do you know why it didn't work?
Please, can I answer?
Do you know why it didn't work?
It didn't work because it wasn't a basic
income. So what they did is they offered it to people who were already in work and gave it to them as an option. Hear me out. Allow me to finish.
Those in work. So why didn't it work with that group?
Do you want to listen?
They offered it to people who are already in work. The idea here is that you take away benefits. Benefits, you're right, is a humiliating process. People often have to wait 6 weeks. Hear me out. Because these people weren't actually looking for work. They already had jobs. The problem is if you've got an individual who doesn't have a job, you take away the sort of the shame of being on benefits and all of that process, and you say, here you are. No, I don't. Here you are. You're now free.
People can't see you at the back, so.
you don't have to worry about going to a job centre all the time, and then you can be a more creative person. You might write, you might start a business. It takes the shame away from it because they weren't unemployed in the first place. There you go.
Still, why?
I think. Do you know what this gentleman had? He's had two people explaining to him how the benefit system in Finland wasn't that different when they tried out a basic income. I think if you're confused still, then you're wanting to be confused, my friend. I think you're willingly not actually looking at.
I agree 100% with it, but if there has to be one big problem, because I can't see the problem.
Both me and him have just said. That's bad grammar, isn't it?
Basically,
You're wanting to be confused about this.
They haven't actually tried it.
You're actually wanting to be confused. A basic income is when it's given to everybody. In Finland, when they tested it out, it was only for people who were already in employment. So it wasn't really a basic income. It was just another form of benefits. That's the problem.
Has it worked? Every time there've been many trials.
You know, you two here, you believe in enterprise, right, and prosperity. Do you know when it was tried out in India? Do you know that more people started starting businesses when they had a basic income? More people quit jobs they didn't like and then spent time working on new businesses.
So have they
that shows you. Did you know why? Because a lot of the time people want to start a business, but they're too frightened of leaving their job because they're frightened of not being able to pay the rent. But if they know they have a basic income, then they're more likely to take those risks. Think about it like this. When a business goes bankrupt, the people, the shareholders and the CEO, they don't have to go to a debtor's prison, which is what they used to have to do a couple of hundred years ago in England. That's what they used to have to do. They have limited liability, so they don't have to do that. Why is it that the big companies have limited liability, but the labor force, ordinary people, don't have limited liability? They don't have a basic income.
But you can. If people actually knew how to do these things in the system, everyone here can do that. Register yourself as a company and work for yourself as that company, and you give yourself a limited liability. And you can.
As an LLC, you're not registering for £1,000 a month, say, to cover your cost of living. Effectively, what you've got is you're no longer liable for your rent. You're not going to go into debt on credit cards. You're basically at zero as £1,000. You pay your rent. You've got money for food, and then you can go out and, I don't know. For me, I might write, or you might, start a business or a TV channel or something, and you might do something. I don't know. You might start another email click company or something.
I really believe that £1,000 a month, just for being a citizen of this country. That makes sense. Get rid of the old benefit system, the bureaucratic, insulting, humiliating benefit system.
Are you insane?
And just pay everybody. The money's there. When people say there's no money enough there, just have a look. Just think for a second. The amount of money you'd save from getting rid of the old benefit system. The amount of money the police force would save from not having to deal with petty crime caused by poverty. Let's be honest, a lot of crime is caused by people not having enough money. I'm trying to be compassionate here for those people who steal stuff. They're not doing it for fun a lot of the time. If they had a basic income, I don't think they'd be doing that, and then there'd be less work for the police, less money needed to be spent on the police.
Drug addiction is a separate problem. Drug addiction causes crime.
I think drug addiction is also caused by poverty as well. I think when you don't have enough money, you're often likely to, people say that the poor are poor because they make bad decisions and they get onto drugs and stuff. I think it's the other way around. I think poor people make bad decisions because they're poor. When they're stressed out and they don't know where the next meal might come from, or maybe not the next meal, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe they don't know if they're going to be able to stay in the end of the month because they're one paycheck away from eviction. If that's the case, then no wonder they start taking drugs, some of these people, just as a way to calm down, just relax. No wonder, I'm not surprised. Let's look at causation from that perspective for a second.
Right, Mr. Chelsea boy. You come from a poor background?
I'm not from a poor background myself.
Okay, I am. I don't take any fucking drugs.
Middle class people are capable of empathy, more than capable of understanding and trying to make a sense of what it's like to live on the dole.
You're trying to be compassionate on behalf of people making decisions. I come from a poor background. I'm not taking any drugs and work for myself.
But people are capable of empathy. If you actually look throughout history, all the greatest revolutionaries, their leaders anyways, they tend to be doing well in their life. They're not poor people. The people who really change society and make it better and advance progress, they don't tend to be very poor. They tend to be people who have the resources on their hands, the time on their hands, to research the problems of society and bring them to all your attention. You can all do something about it. If I tell you what's going on, you can find out more,
How do you expect to change things talking on a street corner?
How do I expect... Yeah, it's like... Do you know what? I'll let you in on something. It does feel like sometimes... It does feel like trying to move a mountain with a toothpick. But what I do know is that when you talk to people at Speaker's Corner, what they do is they often come back and you have that debate and it keeps going. Very often people at Speaker's Corner, they go away to... We're not in year 3, you don't have to keep your hand up, I can see. Very often, for example, I've had these debates with this gentleman here multiple times. for people to see. Many of you will go away and think about it, right? And maybe you'll do something. Maybe you'll join an organization like UK Uncut, or an organization to save the NHS, or you might start a business like a social enterprise. There's all kinds of things people do. So it has an effect. There's like a ripple effect. Never doubt that a small group of people that are committed, who work on changing the minds and hearts of their fellow man, that's how change happens. That's how history changes.
Sorry, but you said you cause a ripple effect. Doesn't speaking about the oppression of the lower class also create a ripple effect inwardly? So the idea would be that if you say that the poor can't change their mind because they're poor, then you're affirming the idea that they can't rise up. That's what capitalism's all about. That's the whole concept. You use your own graft, your own enterprise, to then go and make your way in the world. And the government, the idea is that the government allows the structure surrounding each individual person in order to survive.
I think this, if you don't mind me saying, this is a very simplistic understanding of what capitalism is.
I do mind.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the gentleman's saying capitalism is about people working hard and being enterprising, creating wealth, prosperity, and taking those risks,
yes.
right? And the government should be there to help them do that. It should be there to stop.
The government creates a framework in order for people who are down on their luck to come back up and rise. Correct?
Capitalism has a similar definition, but it's a bit more technical, and I think it's worth bringing up.
Just for the record, I have studied 5 years of economics. I'm a law student from Australia, and I have a lot of these debates.
Okay, yeah.
But the idea is that you have to understand the economic side of things. You have to understand you have to understand the other side. I find that every time, it's funny because I actually get a voice now, but normally we have people from the left-leaning, right, who don't listen to the right. You're standing on your pedestal talking.
Right now. I'm from the left, and I'm
but it's actually nice because normally I don't get hurt. But the idea is that if you're creating this negative affirmation of saying that the poor are poor because you did. I'm repeating your words. All right, please.
When I said that the poor are not poor because they made bad decisions, but they make bad decisions because they're poor, I was trying to be compassionate, understanding, and I was trying to say that if they get together,
so you were saying something that you weren't actually saying,
so that all of them can rise up together, not as individual entrepreneurs, but as a class.
Now you're creating the problem.
That's how changes happened in Britain in the past.
Sorry.
That's how working men got the vote in this country. Through working together.
I'm sorry, but what?
Not for individual entrepreneurship.
Excuse me.
You said you're an economist, right? You studied 5 years of economics, so you'll understand there's an argument for why foreign aid doesn't work. And the reason that foreign aid doesn't work is that an individual who has a marginal propensity to save of zero, which means if I give you $1, you go and spend it all. So the case for that in terms of a universal basic income, if you have $1,000 already and I give you an additional $1, you're not going to go and spend that $1, so it allows you to invest in yourself. Social mobility in capitalism doesn't work. I'm not a lefty, I would say I'm a conservative, so I'm right.
So I find this idea of social mobility a bit strange as well. We talk about Britain as a meritocracy, and I find it really, often it's interesting, those capitalists who, just to be upfront, I'm very committed leftist. I've been so since I was maybe 15. Like anti-capitalist. These capitalists will say to you, I believe in meritocracy and people working hard. And then you ask them about, inheritance, and what you think of inheritance tax. And they'll often be very contradictory. They'll say, no, we can't have inheritance tax. But your kids aren't working for that wealth. Then you start to, that contradiction,
Sorry. Hold on. Can I clarify something there? It's not a contradiction because the idea is that the kids aren't working for the wealth, the individual's working for that wealth, and it's the on-forward of that wealth. If I earn my $1, the idea is that yes, it should be taxed fairly, but I shouldn't be taxed more than anyone else because I've earned more dollars than someone else. Why? Why should I get taxed more if I earn more dollars than you?
Remarkable thing, if you look at the history of this country particularly, it was when Britain had the highest rate of tax on the wealthy.
Why not?
That was when Britain grew most quickly. After World War II.
Why would? But that's the framework of the government.
To argue at that point, so on that
For
point.
those of you who are listening to me, I'll say that again. What economists often call the golden age of capitalism was when Britain had the highest rate of tax on the wealthy. That was when Britain grew most quickly. It was the period roughly from 1945 up until, say, 1977. Very, very rapid growth and development. Before the OPEC instability happened, the 70s, it was one of the highest rates of sustained growth. I mean, the Beatles were very hypocritical. They came out with a song in the 50s called The Tax Man, about how much they didn't want to pay the 90% rate of tax. But actually, the thing is about that song is it's ridiculous. If you think about it, a lot of the wealth that was being redistributed from people like the Beatles downwards to ordinary British people was enabling ordinary British teenage girls to go out and buy Beatles records and give them that money, right? That's the thing that people don't think about when they think about economics. They think it in a very simplistic way. But taxes on the wealthy are great for a good country, for a country like Britain. They can redistribute the wealth down to the people who need it most. It's amazing that I have to explain it. I think people of an earlier generation understood this. It was taken for granted. They didn't need it to be justified to them. That people with a lot of money should have that money taken from them to give to the people who need the money. It makes sense. That's why
both of your arguments coming from the complete wrong place, because you're saying tax the rich. You're saying don't tax the rich. The real issue that we don't, hear me out, the real issue that we've got in this country is that corporations don't pay any tax. Amazon pays zero tax whatsoever. So you won't be affected, you won't be affected. If you actually tax a corporation like Amazon, that can then pay for things like universal basic
Individual wealth should be taxed at a certain rate and corporate tax should be another rate. There's no...
it's not even just a rate, we should actually make sure that we collect it. There's a book called...
That's the biggest deal. When David Cameron was allowing all these companies like Amazon and Starbucks not to pay their taxes, that's essentially a subsidy. That's essentially a government subsidy to those businesses. That makes no sense to me. There are like record numbers of homeless people in London. I think someone said this the other day, at one of the Speaker's Corner meetings. There are more homeless people just living in London than there are people in Norwich. Something like that, ridiculous statistic, right? That's all the while we're supposedly a wealthy country. We hear this all the time. Britain has the 5th biggest economy in the world, 5th strongest economy. I mean, that's remarkable to me. It doesn't have to be like that. That's a conscious choice. Ever since the Enlightenment, philosophers have been pointing this out. A lot of the social problems we have are made because of conscious choices by individuals.
Why individuals? So just throw a spanner, right? It is one of the largest
It's a concept rather than a concrete. It's not a concrete thing. Could be a child lesson, never get caught all your life. Right?
What happens in this life echoes in eternity.
Look at my camera. You've got this dollar.
Just one moment to the next, karma is even the next life to the next.
Yeah, but so in the next life, which I believe there's only one next life, which will be heaven or hell. That's it.
That's what you...
Yes, that's
I think
right.
heaven and hell is a place on earth. They
I know
happen
you do,
moment to
but
moment, depending
that's
on the
your
karma.
belief.
Yeah.
Right. I'm basing my belief on the word of God. I'm listening to him.
I listen to God, he talks to me.
Well, he's only got one word, hasn't he?
He's got many words.
No,
he's not
he's
just
only-
said one thing in his life. Like, hi,
No,
hi.
he's only got one word of God. So you can't make up. You can't make up. You can't make up your own God. Your own God is idolatry. That's your own God, huh?
It's one God. It's
Yes.
not my own God. There's
It is
one God.
because and the God has given us the direction of His Son has to have.
Worshipping that crucified soul. Jesus was crucified was worshipped as God. In some cases, people even denied their Greek gods to worship Jesus. Now, quoting Celsus, as recorded by Plato, as recorded by Origen, a 2nd century Christian leader, in reference to Jesus having gone to Egypt, coming back, he records on account of those powers, namely the powers that Jesus obtained in Egypt, according to them, gave himself the title of God. So according to him, Jesus clearly claimed to be God. Moving on to the third one, Pliny the Younger, taking us back to the second half of the 1st century. The quotation is, in reference to the practices of Christians, Pliny the Younger says, they sang and Trinity versus him to Christ as it were God. So Pliny the Younger again confirms that Jesus was worshipped as God. So this takes us all the way back to the second half of the 1st century. And as you might appreciate, this is consistent with the Christian records of the 1st century that the early disciples, some of whom were recorded in the Gospels, actually worshipped Jesus. Now, in the Gospels, there are at least 9 separate occasions where Jesus was unambiguously worshipped as God. And there are 2 more occasions where arguably he was worshipped as God. I'm going to quote 3 of these things for our benefit today. Now, he had contrary wind.
They say you sold your soul to the devil.
Oh, right.
Come take over everything from your humanity.
Come, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to IT.
It being a real conspiracy.
Everybody have to be
You look at, like, for example, Muslims were accused of carrying out the anthrax biological terror attacks, and for a number of years it was believed Muslims carried it out. It was only when the DNA of the anthrax was proven to have come from Fort Detrick military base in Virginia, Maryland, that it was proven that Muslims were not responsible.
I tell you the truth, you know this whole American British system here, the whole establishment. Yeah, I don't even trust them. Like,
I don't trust them either. You've got a right not to trust them.
I know
their history is disgusting.
But I tell you the truth, yeah, some white people here would consider